With a retropharyngeal and peritonsillar abscess, an abscess is a collection of pus, and retropharyngeal and peritonsillar describes where the abscess is found. A retropharyngeal abscess develops behind the pharynx, in the tissue that lies just behind the back of the throat. A peritonsillar abscess develops around the tonsils, particularly the palatine tonsils, which are at the back of the throat. Let's start by better defining the location of these spaces. The retropharyngeal space is the region between the pharynx and the vertebrae, and is bound posteriorly, closer to the vertebrae, by the alar fascia, and anteriorly, or closer to the pharynx, by the buccopharyngeal fascia. These fascial layers are thin fibrous layers that coat muscles, tendons, and bones. And between them and the retropharyngeal space are lymph nodes. These lymph nodes are like surveillance stations that bring in lymphatic fluid from the throat and other nearby tissue. If there are pathogens in that lymphatic tissue, immune cells in the lymph node can respond and try to destroy the invading pathogens. Next is the peritonsillar region, which refers to the palatine tonsils. The palatine tonsils are on either side of the oral pharynx and are attached to the soft palate at the back of the oral cavity. They're basically dense collections of lymphatic tissue wrapped within a fibrous capsule, like tiny lymph burritos, and they help defend against pathogens in the food and air. When pathogens like bacteria invade tissues in the mouth, they're brought to nearby lymph nodes. When the retropharyngeal lymph nodes or palatine lymph nodes receive a pathogen, it activates an immune response. Oftentimes, the first immune cells at the scene are neutrophils, which release chemicals and enzymes that kill bacteria and dissolve pieces of dead cells, creating a pool of dead material. This is a specific type of acute inflammatory response called suppurative inflammation, which just means that pus is created in the process. From a macroscopic view, this is sometimes referred to as a liquefactive necrosis, because the area of dead tissue turns to liquid. As those immune cells get to a point where they can't withstand the environment, they die too, and become part of the pool. Initially, the debris might be intermixed with healthy tissue, but over time it can coalesce into a single area, a process that's often sped up when more immune cells get involved. Around this pool of pus, a wall of fibrinogen, which is the same protein that holds together blood clots, starts to harden into a barrier. Occasionally, sheets of fibrin form septations, creating loculations or pockets of pus within the abscess itself, kind of like an abscess within an abscess. Even though the pus is largely dead material, there are still plenty of live bacteria within the pus, which makes it highly infectious if it gets spread from one place to another. As the abscess grows, it can press against nearby structures. Both retropharyngeal and peritonsillar abscesses can start to press into the pharynx. At that point, the abscess becomes especially problematic because it can obstruct the upper airway and become life-threatening. These infections can also spread into the lymphatic system. Retropharyngeal infections can spread downward into the mediastinum and pericardium, and peritonsillar infections can spread to the tongue, soft palate, and pharyngeal space. The infection could also spread systemically through the blood, and it can lead to a massive inflammatory response called sepsis. Both retropharyngeal and peritonsillar abscesses are typically caused by a mix of bacteria, often including Staphylococcus aureus, Group A Streptococci, and Haemophilus parainfluenzae. Interestingly, retropharyngeal abscesses are most common among toddlers and young children, whereas peritonsillar abscesses typically affect older children and adults. The most common symptoms of both a retropharyngeal and peritonsillar abscess are fever and severe throat pain or stiffness. Sometimes there's a large mass that causes pharyngeal obstruction, or pain with swallowing. And in severe cases, there can be signs of airway obstruction, like a high-pitched noise on inspiration, called stridor, and retractions, which is where ribs show through as they breathe. Diagnosis of peritonsillar or retropharyngeal abscess can be made with an X-ray or CT scan, both of which would show the collection of pus within the tissue. If there's any drainage, it can be sent off for tissue culture to reveal the cause of the abscess. Blood tests can reveal signs of an infection, like an increased number of immune cells, like neutrophils, and blood cultures can help to find the cause if the bacteria is in the bloodstream. Typically, a large abscess that might be obstructing the airway needs to be surgically drained. In addition, antibiotics can help treat the infection, and steroids are sometimes helpful in quickly reducing the inflammation. If peritonsillar abscesses keep developing, sometimes a tonsillectomy can be done to help prevent a recurrence. Alright, as a quick recap. Retropharyngeal or peritonsil abscesses are collections of pus in the retropharyngeal space or the palatine tonsils, respectively. The most common causes are Staphylococcus aureus, Group A streptococci, and Haemophilus parainfluenzae. And the key treatment is surgical drainage, antibiotics, and steroids, particularly in situations where there's a lot of inflammation that obstructs the airway.